Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Cameron, and I'm here from Safe Deposits Scotland, here to give you this webinar today, Wednesday, the 16th of September. This is on the tenants journey. I have just started the presentation. I hope you can all hear me. Do let us know if you cannot. I'm going to give it just a minute, as I see there's still some people who've registered that are waiting on arriving. And once they've given it enough time, I think I'll start with the presentation. So I'll just give them a minute for now. I'm going to keep the presentation itself to maybe around 25-30 minutes long. It is a Wednesday afternoon, so I'm sure everyone else has other stuff to be getting on with. And I just looked outside there. The weather in Glasgow, not great, quite warm, but not awful either, so maybe let you get away. There will be time for questions at the end. There'll also be a wee prize draw for everyone that's checked in this afternoon. I'll maybe as well just pay homage to the fact that it is Scottish Housing Day today, and before we get into the meat of the matter. Just looking at my timer there, I'll maybe give up until 2 minutes in before I start the presentation. Okie dokes, I'm not seeing any names flood in, but like I said, a brief introduction for Scottish Housing Day. So I'll get stuck in with that, and if people do join in, then they can indeed. So there we are, just going to pay homage, like I said. This will be the 5th year in a row of Scottish Housing Day. Got some talking points here. Scottish Housing Day and Safe Deposits. We've been a part of it for the last few years or so, and there's a quote I'm just going to read out to you from Scottish Housing Day's website, taken from the Commission on Housing and Wellbeing back in 2015, and it's that good housing offers a stable foundation from which to build a home, and does so through providing shelter, security and space for family life and activities, privacy, personal identity and development. And we just think that maybe that statement, particularly the bit on space and security, is important now more than ever, especially in this mid-lockdown world that we all inhabit. The house has become much more than a home. It's become a classroom or a library or an office to a great many of us. Now that we have to get on with things, we're not quite sure when life returning to what we once knew as normality is going to happen. This year's theme is mostly about social housing, but Safe Deposits, we operate almost exclusively within the private rented sector of Scotland's housing. So that's what we'll be focusing on today, particularly the journey of the tenant through registration while they're staying in and when they come to move out of a property that they might rent. Got some statistics here I'll read out to you. The latest figures that we got back in 2018 were that there are 371,000 homes in Scotland's private rented sector, which from the last comparable time that figures were taken 15 years ago in 2003, those figures have since more than doubled. So it does show a huge increase. And what's important to understand is that the private rented sector is a home to a huge number of people all across Scotland. It's important that we try and make everyone informed and educated about the private rented sector, particularly our engagement with it and the services we provide, and just to try and make the tenancies run smoothly for everyone involved. So that's Scottish Housing Day. Without further ado, let's get into the meat of the matter. First, I'm just going to cover some of the key documentation that you're likely to encounter, especially if you deal with us, Safe Deposits, or any of our contemporaries. The first and foremost is the prescribed information form. This is a legal obligation which agents or landlords should provide to their tenants when the tenancy begins, or officially within 30 working days of when the tenancy begins. So that's closer in layman's terms to roughly about 6 weeks, and it covers all sorts of things like the address and the deposit amount, the parties involved. That should all be covered in the tenancy agreement, but importantly, this tells you what you can claim from the deposit and which parts of the tenancy agreement it relates to. The only time we ever reserve this document would be if there's been a material change, and by that we mean one of the parties has changed, the deposit value has changed, and it's important that this effectively legal document is updated in kind. The next is the deposit protection certificate, and this serves a purpose similar to a receipt of payment. And now you as a tenant, you'll pay your deposit to your landlord or your letting agent. They then are obliged under the legislation to protect it with us safe deposits, and this will serve as your receipt. If you're a tenant, we'll send this out to you to show that we hold your deposit, what the value is. It will tell you all the contact information. It will cover a lot of the same things that prescribed information form I just mentioned has. It should be sent to you by email, but of course, if it is only a postal address we've got, we will send a copy out to you. And that'd be if we didn't have an email address, for instance. And if it's only a phone number that we have for you, then we'll send you a text to let you know. Of course, text isn't the most comprehensive way of getting in touch. And it's in times like that we would send out a letter, because at least we know there is a deposit that we've got for someone staying at that address. That last note on the slide there about the DAN number, that stands for deposit account number. That is a safe deposit's unique number. So if your deposit is with us, we should either be able to find and give you, or your landlord or agent should be able to give you that deposit account number. Now relate to your name, your deposit at that property. What to do if you don't know where your deposit is protected, or if you don't think it is protected at all? The first port of call would be to contact the party that you're in the tenancy agreement with. Contact your letting agent or your landlord. Let them know that you haven't been able to find, or you're not sure. They should be able to give you all the information. If they're not able to do that and you're still not sure, there's 3 company numbers on screen there. There's us, that's Safe Deposits. Then there's our 2 contemporaries who are allowed to protect Scottish tenancy deposits. That's My Deposit Scotland and LPS, the Letting Protection Service. So if you're not sure who's got a deposit, by calling all 3 of those numbers, you should be able to find out if at least it is protected somewhere. If it isn't protected somewhere, that last bullet point referencing the first tier tribunal, that's run by the Housing and Property Chamber. They are the people to go and talk to about trying to chase up your landlord about getting a payment order, it would be, to get your deposit paid back. And that last little point, you should make sure that you do that within 3 months, so within 12 weeks of your tenancy having ended. You don't need to do it during the tenancy, but once your tenancy has moved out, if we don't have your deposit, you should contact the tribunal. About Safe Deposits service specifically, once we do have a deposit, is we offer this service called Alternative Dispute Resolution. If there's any quibbles about getting the deposit paid out at the end of the tenancy, and the dispute would be if your landlord or agent made a claim on the deposit and you were happy with only some of it, or you weren't happy with it at all, and you wanted us to host a dispute to try and resolve the matter. That's what ADR is. And the particular brand of which we offer is called mediation. It serves as a kind of stepping stone to go into the tribunal or the small claims court. It's totally free, it's impartial and evidence-based. We like to think it comes to a fair and reasonable outcome, and keyly, it is legally binding. So once an agreement is reached or a decision is published by the body we get to look at the evidence and make the decision, is legally binding, as that's how you had agreed to have the deposit dispute resolved. Just that last point on who the adjudicators are. So these would be the people that made the decision on the deposit dispute itself. They are totally impartial. They'll never speak to either party. They'll never visit the property. They'll focus exclusively on the evidence, and they have a very strict code of rules to follow. They're all members of the Chartered Institute for Arbitrators. They don't all come from a property and legal background, but sometimes both, sometimes one or the other, with a mixture of other professional interests in between. But they're all qualified and trained up on what to look for when it comes to these kind of disputes, so we trust that they make the right decisions. Next of all, we're going to look at the disputes that safe deposits are actually allowed to resolve. It does what it says on the tin there. Under the yes column, we've got the things that we can look at a dispute for. Importantly as well, these are the things that can be claimed from a deposit. These are the things that we are actually allowed to look at if it came into contest. Cleaning, simple enough. That's if there's cleaning issues needing dealt with. Damage, redecoration, gardening, we call them dilapidations. Missing items, if there's something not on the inventory when you come to move out, or if you're a landlord or agent, your tenant moves out. Rent arrears, any unpaid rent from during the tenancy, and other obligations in your lease. Leases can include specially negotiated clauses or extra obligations in them. These can cover all sorts of things, to making sure the electricity meter is the same at least as it was when you moved out. If there's a water collection tank, making sure it's full. Anything else, if it was a particularly big garden, making sure it was maintained. But perhaps more importantly, the no side of that slide there, these are the things that an adjudicator wouldn't be able to consider if the landlord or agent claimed them, or if you thought that they, as a tenant, would invalidate any claims made on your deposit. These can be any arguments between the parties that don't directly relate to the deposit. These can be all sorts of things. They come in many shapes and sizes. We've got counterclaims. I didn't pay my rent because X, Y, Z, things that you think counter against, things that back against any claims made by your landlord or agent. And then set offs brought by the tenant. So that would be, I didn't pay my rent because the furniture I left in the property was more expensive. Things you've actually done that you think invalidate any claim made, or at least bring you on an even keel. After that is premium charges. Not all that common, but some letting agents or landlords do use them, and they can be legally binding, but they're not necessarily something that the deposit can be offset against, such as if there was a recurring fee for late payment of rent. Every time you paid your rent late, it was to be a certain amount taken off of your deposit at the end. We wouldn't necessarily be able to award for that, only any outstanding rent arrears itself, and then sums in excess of the deposit. If the claim that your landlord or agent made, or if you do want to make a claim on the tenant's deposit, if it's worth more than the actual deposit we protect, we would still only have that initial pot of money the tenant paid in to pay out when the tenancy comes to an end. How the adjudicators reach their decision if there is a dispute is a fairly simple process in of itself. It is that legally the deposit is the tenant's money. That's who paid it. That's who was obliged to pay it under the tenancy agreement, and that's why we protect it, because it's their money. It needs to be kept impartially, like a bank, until the tenancy comes to an end. If there is to be a claim, the landlord or agent, they have the onus, the burden of proof to demonstrate their claim. If they can, the adjudicator is able to award the deposit. If they're not able to prove their claim, the adjudicator isn't able to. It's not like in court, for instance. If you know how the courts work, they use beyond a reasonable doubt. That would be criminal situations. We use a more civil approach, and that's on the balance of probabilities. So that's the test of the reasonable person. Is it likely that this deposit should be paid out or not? We'll go into slightly more detail now on the counterclaims and the offsets. So over to the counterclaims. Like we covered earlier, I didn't pay my rent because. That would be if the boiler, for instance, broke during your tenancy, maybe for a month or two, and you had to go without hot water for a month or two. That ties in to a later point there on the holdbacks. You can choose not to pay your rent, but there's a few things you want to be aware of if you do that. You will be held responsible for paying the rent until the end of your tenancy. That's not something you want to fall afoul of. It sometimes can be used if you want to strong arm, so to speak, your landlord into effecting, in that hypothetical, repairs for the boiler, but we would always advise against it. Accruing rent arrears is never a good idea. And another point would be if there are any rent arrears on your account for, I think it's 3 months, that could be grounds to start eviction. It's always safer that one hand doesn't take away from the other, and that you cover all your bases through the tenancy, but unfortunately they wouldn't count a claim against any honest claims, any valid claims they could prove against your deposit, they being the landlord or agent. If you are in any doubt at all, that last point on under-counter claims there is still quite important. Go to the first tier tribunal. They will tell you if you have a case or if you have a reason to apply to the tribunal. Other side is what is an offset. So this is slightly different. This is a more overt action. This is if there's anything you've done that you feel maybe improved the property, if you've redecorated it or brought in new furniture, even the fact that you had paid your rent all on time and never raised an issue with your landlord, this wouldn't necessarily outweigh any legitimate claims made on your deposit. Breaches of the tenancy agreement unfortunately do happen sometimes on both sides. Just because your landlord or your agent have maybe not fulfilled their obligations does not mean that you do not need to fulfill yours. That circles into the rent arrears that we spoke about earlier, but it's always safe, again, if there's anything you've done that you maybe feel difficult about, it would be worth contacting the tribunal to see if it would be more appropriate for them to host a case for you and see if there's anything they can do. On now to avoiding the ADR process if it doesn't sound too appealing to you. I will just mention at this point that is probably crucial to understand that of all the deposits we've got, less than 2% of the time do deposits actually fall into dispute. Even less than that, do they actually go to the adjudicator? So most of the time, well over 9 times out of 10, if you're a landlord or agent, your tenant should come and go without trouble. And if you're a tenant, there shouldn't be any reason really for a serious dispute to take place. But going into, if you do end up into dispute, there's a couple of ways to resolve the issue maybe a bit more amicably. The first being that negotiation, and it's through negotiation, through trying to resolve the dispute amicably, by having conversations, by involving us and having conversations, you're able to reach a more, at least in your eyes, fair and reasonable outcome. It is the only way that you're able to keep total agency over what's agreed to, as in both parties need to agree on sums that are going to be paid out of the deposit. You will have a final say on that as much as whoever the other party is. It does save a considerable length of time. The total ADR process from once a dispute is started to when the decision might be published can be as much as 70 or 80 working days, depending on if we receive reviews or not. So it can take quite a length of time. If we are able to resolve the disputes amicably, we can do that in the first week and then have the funds paid out within 5 working days thereafter. So within a fortnight of the dispute beginning, it can be ended. What that does is remove a great deal of stress or anxiety about the process or the uncertainty of how the dispute is going to end. And for a lot of people, this will be important. You can get the money, even if it's not the whole deposit, paid out sooner. As I mentioned, negotiation is how we conduct this self-resolution. We would mediate between the parties if maybe dialogue was no longer as open as it once was. Sometimes the parties don't wish to speak to each other. The relationship is broken down. It helps to have an impartial third party like us involved. We'll manage each party's expectations, and from there we'll see if there is a way that we can reach a common ground, come to a compromise, and resolve the dispute itself. All we would ask is that the parties keep an open mind. If there wasn't a dispute, either one party wouldn't want to make the claim or the other party would be happy to agree to it fully. It does take a little bit of come and go from both sides. So it might not be exactly what you want, but if you can rationalize that the claim is going to be at least preferable to losing all of your claim or losing all of your deposit or whatever the claim might be, we would always recommend that you consider trying to reach an agreement amicably. And that last point there, we can resolve these disputes within 5 working days or less. On to now, if it's not possible to have the self-resolution, to have an agreement reached, we'll move on to what's called evidence gathering. And this is the meat and potatoes of how the adjudicators come to their decisions. They will look exclusively at the evidence provided for the case that they are looking at. There are distinctly 2 different kinds of evidence that can be provided. There is Essential evidence, which you can see on the left-hand side there, that is your tenancy agreement. That proves, like we covered at the start, who the parties are, how much the deposit is, and importantly, the reasons that a claim can be made on the deposit. It sets out the tenant's accountability towards the property. After that is the check-in and check-out inventories or reports. Sometimes these are done by hand, sometimes these are carried out by special companies. But what they do is establish the condition of the property when the tenancy started and when the tenancy ended. And then after that is rent statements, and that would just be a ledger or some such if there were any rent arrears on the account. Now on the right-hand side, you've got your helpful evidence over there. These are perhaps more contextual. You've got photographs and videos. They help demonstrate whatever the check-in and the check-out report list. Then you've got your proof of costs after that, your invoices, your quotes and receipts and so on for any work needing done or items purchased. Then there can be any other background correspondence or information, emails, letters, text conversations, and then indeed anything else that's relevant to the case. And we really could be here all day listing all of the things that could potentially influence the adjudicator's decision. As we covered there, the tenancy agreement, it lists all the parties' information, all the parties' details. It talks about the different responsibilities and, again, most importantly, enshrines the tenant's responsibility towards the property. Covers the principles of fairness, and it's important that that last point on clarity and transparency is met so that no one can be under any illusions as to what their responsibilities are. And that pendulum swings both ways so that the landlord or letting agent and vice versa with the tenant know who is accountable to who for what. Back over to our inventories and schedules of condition. They compare the condition of the property at the start and end of the tenancy, and these are really important because they cover cleaning, gardening, redecoration, any damages. The more comprehensive, the best. They don't all need to be forensic. You don't need to go right down to the wire on them all, but as long as they cover everything that's in a room and then in the property itself, everyone knows what the condition of the tenancy start date was like, and then what the condition of the tenancy end date should be like, and it'd be the difference between the conditions on those dates that the adjudicator would look to find and potentially award for. Then back over to our rent statements. There's a couple of key points that they'll want to cover. They'll want to cover the rent, how much it was per month, when it was last paid, if there's any pro rata, so not a full month's worth, but maybe just a couple of weeks or a couple of days, specific number of days even. You want to show you're working to, first of all, to each other if you're a landlord or an agent dealing with the tenant, and the other way around, and you're not sure exactly why rent arrears are being claimed, but to the adjudicator. You want to show you're working, like when you're doing maths in school, show you're working so they can see how you've arrived at a number that you have. It should be clear what the balance at the end is. Oh, just as well, I noticed that last point on if you'd paid in cash, make sure that there are receipts being paid out. Just the same if you're a landlord or agent, if the tenant's paying you their rent in cash, make sure that you give them receipts. So you want there to be a paper trail both ways for when money changes hands. And on to you tenants for keeping yourselves right during the tenancy, the things you can do to make sure that you don't, or at least can avoid, the chances of a claim being made on your deposit. Make sure that when you move in, you take a copy of the inventory. Now, you should be given this when you move in or just at the start before you move in, and a copy of the inventory for the property, and you should be given a certain amount of time. I think commonly it can be 5 to 7, maybe 10 days to familiarize yourself with the property and note down anything to do with the property that is a little different from what the inventory says. This can be if anything is broken, if there's any marks, if there's any bad painting, if anything's listed as clean but isn't clean when you actually move in. Make sure to note all of this down, because this is what will set the bar for how you need to give the property back. I need to make that very, very important. Make sure that you do report any issues you find when you move into the property to your landlord or agent on the inventory. Specifically onto cleaning, probably the most important points on this slide are the first and the last ones. So cleaning is not fair wear and tear. The example I often use for this is that an object can be broken but clean, or it can be dirty but functional. So cleaning and fair wear and tear are not the same thing. Cleaning is about the cleanliness, the state of cleanliness of an object or area, whereas fair wear and tear relates to the lifespan, the use and functionality of an object or area, and we'll cover that in greater detail later. But for just now, as before with the check and report, make sure that you note down if there are any areas on the property that aren't as clean as they state. The landlord does not need to provide you with cleaning materials. They kind of expect you to provide these yourselves, washing up liquid for your dishes, bleach for the toilet, and so on. And that last point, the landlord does not need to let you back into the property. And we mention this because quite a lot we do get phone calls where a landlord or an agent has flagged up to tenants that there are cleaning issues, and the tenants ask, can we return to the property to make good those issues? After the final date of the tenancy is passed, that they're under no obligation to let you in. You can ask, your landlord might let you in, but if not, and you are facing cleaning issues, it's safer to deal with them as they are then. Next, on to redecorating. Again, really important to make it clear that it is your home for while you're staying there in the property. You can make yourself comfortable, and you can choose to decorate or redecorate how you see fit. We would just say that you make sure that you have permission for any works that you do carry out. Permission is very important, because you might say to your landlord, I'd like to repaint living room. And look, if the living room's already magnolia, it would make a big difference if you want to paint it to off-white, or if you want to paint it Barbie pink, because those are very different colors. But if you do get permission, try to get it in writing, try to keep a record of it. The same would go if you're a landlord, just so that everyone knows what the terms of the agreement are, and make sure that you return the property how you got it when you move out. So permission's one thing, but you still do need to return the property in the same condition as when you moved in, I should say. Next, on to pets. Not everyone loves animals. An unfortunate first bullet point I need to read out there. I love dogs. I'm a dog person. My boss, she has a dog and a budgie. She is a tenant as well. Not everyone does. It's important to remember, I should say, just as much with cleaning or with redecorating, you want to get permission ahead of time. Sometimes you might need to pay a little bit more on your deposit, or add on some to your deposit for getting a cat or a dog into the property. But that is just the nature of it. You are staying in the landlord's property, and under the tenancy agreement, you will need to, get permission. Just as much as you get permission, if you do, make sure you get it again in writing. If the compromise is that you can have a dog, but you need to have all the upholstery and soft furnishings cleaned before the end of the tenancy, and the cat and the carpet shampooed, maybe that's the way to go about it. But just as before, the safest thing you can do to cover yourself is make sure you return the property as you got it. On to mold next. Again, another unfortunate issue that appears in pretty much every property. It's very commonly claimed by landlords, but the good news is it can be avoided easily. Just a few tips there. Don't dry your clothes on the radiators without opening the windows. That creates condensation, which if stacked up over time will lead to mold. If there are extractor fans or dehumidifiers in the property, make sure to use them regularly, especially when doing things like drying clothes. Let the steam out of the kitchen or the bathroom if you're cooking or washing. Keep pot lids on. Lots of little things. Don't overboil the kettle too often. And if you are going to, make sure the room, at least that it's in, is very well ventilated. Most important point is, if you do notice mold in the property when you move in, be sure to report it diligently. On to next, gardening. Not every property has a garden. My flat doesn't have a garden, but some of them, of course, do. Much like I mentioned earlier with the cleaning, the landlord's not obliged to provide you, the tenant, with gardening tools. It would be the same sort of thing if the dishes were clean at the start of the tenancy. You'd be expected to clean them for the end. You don't need, but the landlord doesn't need to provide you with a fairy liquid. If there's a specially negotiated clause. It could be covered that you need to pay a little extra month to have a gardener attend the property. This is similar to having a factor or cleaner attend. But if not, try to keep on top of it or arrange gardening of your own. If you're in any doubt when the tenancy comes to end and maybe the garden hasn't been returned the same way, the best thing to do is steer into the problem, call your landlord or agent, talk about how they would want the gardening returned, even arrange to meet with them or arrange to have gardening done under their instruction. It could avoid there being a claim on the deposit. On to next, fair wear and tear. Perhaps best summarised in that first bullet point, which I want to say is a quote from the House of Lords, which is the reasonable use of premises by the tenant. And this is the important part, the ordinary operation of natural forces, which is a lovely legal phrase there. This is just the usual everyday use of an item, an object, or an area. It mitigates any claims that can be made for damages, but it doesn't always invalidate them, just because it is that natural aging, that natural wearing down of an object or area. It can be expected. For longer tenancies, it's likely to be worse. For older items, it's maybe likely to be worse. But again, we'll just reiterate, it does not go hand in hand with cleaning issues. Damage would be, without fair and tear, would be something that's gone beyond just the normal operation of forces. We'll compare now what the difference is between the two, perhaps a little more starkly. Fair wear and tear would be scuffs on walls. Compare that with drawing on walls. Perhaps you've got small kids in the house. We mentioned pets earlier. If there's scuff marks on the walls at Labrador height, for instance, that is not going to be fair wear and tear so much as just average scuffs from moving yourself and belongings in and out of the property. Shading and fraying to the carpets is another good example there. Of course, if there's maybe a spare bedroom in the property, the carpet's not going to be as badly worn there as it would be in the front door of the hallway, where people are coming and going a couple of times a day. The obvious counter to that would be if there's dents on wooden floors. Just walking on wooden floors would be the same thing, but if you have, I don't know, maybe a couple of children that do tap dancing classes, that's going to cause a lot more damage to the floor than just walking on it in normal shoes. The story repeats itself. You've got on the other side there fading to cartons and upholstery. That happens just as soft furnishings get old. Cracks in plasterboard, that happens in a property as time goes on. Then over to damages, again, you've got things like cracked bath panels, it would be cracked tiles, I suppose, as well. Or burn marks to kitchen worktops, or indeed dining tables. Dining tables is a good example because a lot of times someone will cook something in a big pot or a tureen and they'll place it down on the table, forgetting that it's wood. They'll leave it there for a couple of seconds. There's already a burn mark, a semicircle burn mark. The key distinction between fair wear and tear. Fair wear and tear just kind of happens as time goes on. Damage is anything that is an overt action that's caused something to take place. When you come to move out, there's a couple of things that you can do to cover your back at the end of the tenancy if you're a tenant. And these are maybe things, if you're a landlord or agent tuning in, you might want to make your tenants aware of. That will keep the property in a better condition and it will stop a reason for there being a claim on the deposit. That would be to make sure that notice is served and handed in properly. So if I were to give my landlord the notice that I wanted to move out next week, I've only given it today. I'm still going to be liable for the next, it would be 28 days if it's a PRT. There might be other older tenancy agreements out there at different times. You want to make sure everyone knows when they're going to be responsible up to the end of that tenancy, when that date's going to be. If you're in doubt, best to have that conversation early on and check the tenancy agreement. The only something important to establish is that moving out and ending the tenancy are different things. If you're liable for the next 28 days rent, you technically are a tenant for the next 28 days. If you move out after 2 weeks and, for instance, dust accrues over the following 2 weeks, you will, if you're a tenant, be responsible for the cleaning of that dust. What to do when you come to actually move out at the end of the tenancy. Check and report that inventory that we told you to mark down if there's any issues on when the tenancy ends. Make sure that the property that you're handing back to the landlord or the letting agent matches. Make sure there's nothing has gone overlooked. It's always safe to do because there can be so many little things. It's easy to forget something. just have a walk around the property and make sure everything matches. If there's any dilapidations, anything that's gone wrong or broken, make sure they were hopefully reported at the time, or at the very least reported in advance of your tenancy ending. It would make a big difference if there was perhaps some moisture accruing somewhere in the bathroom, but it would make and the landlord, found out maybe 3 months before the end of the tenancy, as opposed to coming into the property and finding out there's a mold problem. At the very least, it keeps the dialogue open, honest, and amicable. We would expect that the landlord to do the same thing when they come to check the property, and hopefully, if both parties have done this, we'll all be aware of what the consistencies are, and we'll be able to reach agreements a little easier. And that takes us to nearly the end. We'll get onto the prize draw. I'm noticing the time, so we will read out who the lucky winner is. My glamorous assistant Alan has passed me over who is going to be today's winner from our registrations. It is one Victoria Fox. So congratulations, Victoria. You have won, I think, £100 of Amazon vouchers. Alan's nodding at me. It is indeed £100 of Amazon vouchers for whatever you want. We spoke about Fairy Liquid a lot today. Get yourself a 6-month supply of that. Victoria, we'll be in touch with you by email after the presentation to sort out the details. Next of all, then, we'll get on to nearly the end. What I'm going to do just now is open up our chat function, and if anyone has any questions about anything I've spoken about or anything else, then by all means do let me know, and I'll just answer them as they come to the room. You can send questions privately, or you can send them openly for everyone else to see. We'll just take the moment while we were waiting to see if there's any questions coming in, to thank everyone for turning up today on this Scottish Housing Day. I'm sure you had much more exciting plans in place for Scottish Housing Day. Marked, well, I'd say all over the world, but clues in the name, just in Scotland. If you're worried as well, will you be able to get the slides for this show? We'll email them out to the registrars, but the presentation itself is going to be uploaded to our social media accounts and our YouTube channel, where it will stay for all eternity. So you've not missed out. If there's anyone that you think would benefit from this webinar, you can find it there, and probably in a few days once our tech gurus have had their way with it. So not seeing any questions rolling in. I'll just give it another minute or two. I should say as well, there's maybe some, not lag, so to speak, but latency during the presentation. What I would do is stop and then wait to pick up where it left off. So I'll maybe leave the chat window open for another minute at the end of the presentation if anyone is experiencing latency. Just not seeing any questions in there, folks. Don't be shy. Don't be shy. I know there's not that many of you this Wednesday afternoon. If there's anything at all you're not sure of, any phone numbers you want to double check on, happy to answer anything. So at times like this, you kind of wish there was some elevator music open to you, but unfortunately, we haven't gotten that far with technology yet. Oh, 2 questions just picked. Well, one from you, Dove. No questions, but enjoyed the presentation. Thank you for saying so. I'm glad that you did. Be sure to let your friends know to go and check it out if you have any friends that would be interested in this particular piece of media. But we've got a private question for SDS resolution associated to safe deposits. Clue is in the name here. SDS stands for Safe Deposits Scotland, and this is a relatively new service we're offering, SDS resolution. I'll maybe take a minute to explain what that is. It is a new service for situations where there's a tenancy either ongoing or with a end date set somewhere in the future. It's not indefinite, but isn't very soon. So if there's maybe a 6 months notice has been given and there are rent arrears present on the account, SDS resolution is this new service where we will take a slightly more hands-on approach to mediation, to go back and forth between the parties and maybe even set a meeting to try and consolidate those arrears. And when we say consolidate those arrears, we mean maybe come to an agreement where the tenant would pay a very small amount over quite a long period of time, not quite a long, but maybe £25 for 2 years, however much that would come to pay off their rent arrears if they are hard up. And it was brought in as in the wake of the coronavirus lockdown situation we find ourselves in, as some tenants have been on furlough or lost their jobs or have eaten into their savings and are now getting to the point where they do need some financial assistance. And it is a good way, if they are good tenants or they are due to get their job back and you don't want to lose them, it can be a good way to recoup those losses later on, but not lose the source of income indefinitely. And if they are good tenants, the idea is you generally want to keep them in the property. It's no one's fault really that the coronavirus kicked in, but the service will be sticking around for after that. So if you or anyone you know, tenants or landlords, have some serious rent arrears situations starting up, then maybe it's worth looking into SDS resolution. And just while I mention that, there's another service that we offer more directly involved with safe deposits, and it is our end of tenancy advice line. If anything that we've spoken about today you're not sure of, or if there's a dispute that you might have on the horizon, the tenancy coming to an end, and you're afraid there could be a dispute about getting that deposit returned, then you can call us on the main phone line, which I'll just read out now, is 0333 213 136, and by pressing option 5, it will be me or one of my colleagues on the disputes team that answers the phone, and we'll talk about the hypotheticals, the evidence requirements, and maybe see if there's a better way to solve the situation. So I'm not seeing any more questions coming in. I'm noticing that we've stretched over the time a little bit. We're edging into our 43rd minute. So I'm maybe going to leave the window open for another little bit. I'm going to turn the camera and the audio off, and I'll let you all go about your day. But thank you again, everyone, for turning up. Victoria, congratulations on the prize. And Dove, thanks for letting us know you enjoyed the presentation. Until the next time, folks, be sure to let us know if you have any comments or criticism. We'll take it on board for the next presentation. But thank you again, everyone, for tuning in.